to all of you. uh, First, I'm going to, I guess, there are going to be basically three large sections that I want to divide my talk on. Some common underlying factors towards India's bilateral policy towards labor, with very specific reference to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And then, of course, talk about specific developments which are unfolding in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and then finally conclude with the role of what Professor Saran Singh just referred to as China and US in the two particular space that we're dealing with. And for very long, the narrative of India's foreign policy towards its neighbors was dominated with this discourse that if you didn't mend your fences with your neighbors, how would you get your place under the Committee of Nations? There was always, the world was constantly at this certain point of time judging India through the perceptions that the neighbors had about India, and that often kind of hedged us, put us in a corner. But I think we've really, and it's not only a reference to Obama president visit to India, but we've really broken away from that. And while we're certainly not all of it. Are we, yeah, is this better? As I said that India was often judged by the way the neighbors perceived India and its particular role in the neighborhood. But I think we've broken away from that more finally today as we speak, that while we're clearly not really the favorite guy in the neighborhood, and it's always a challenge to be the favorite guy in the neighborhood, you see that everywhere. But we've certainly mended some fences, and but we've been able to kind of, place ourselves in the Committee of Nations, so to say. And I think that's something the neighbors are constantly watching us. And in fact, as Saran Singh did mention about how Pandit Nehru constantly said that, our foreign policy battles are really not going to be won or lost in the way the foreign policy trajectory is undertaken, but actually the domestic arena. And how the domestic developments are going to have far-reaching effects on our foreign policy with the neighborhood especially. Why do I say that? For very long we've seen, irrespective of what was being undertaken in India vis-a-vis its own neighborhood, the perception and attitudes of the neighborhood was overwhelming the way everybody judged it. And there was of course a reference yesterday to about the problem of identity that India has vis-a-vis neighbors. That's obviously something which is a historical geographical matter. There's nothing that anyone can do about it. It's a fact that India is considered a hegemon. The sizes, every other indexes are completely overwhelming in terms of the other smaller neighbors. So there's really very little that India can do about that. But on the other hand, we've also seen that there has been attitudes where India has been constantly, judged in a way that you've been the bad neighbor, the large neighbor, and all that. But also India's on many occasions also, pursued policy which really didn't bring it any problem. Very specifically, if I again, we'll come back to this later, where they're saying that whether it's important to be the favorite guy in the neighborhood, I'm not really sure that's relevant or important anymore, just the way we stand today. But at the same time, I think there is a problem that we've seen in the neighborhood, that there's constantly, and SARC was a perfect example of that, where they often wanted to gang up against you. And many in India have constantly given the expression that SARC, which is moved by Bangladesh in 1985, is really on such a text. The entry of China into SARC was also similar to that. I mean, we've seen how they were bulldozing to accepting China as an observer. And of course, it's a fact that SARC really has absolutely very little evidence. We have the summit meetings and nothing what it's really takes place, and the document that gets signed is very anodyne kind of a document that takes place. But at the same time, there is one particular regional organization in South Asia, so obviously nobody can really work out of it. We've seen how Pakistan and India is constantly blamed about the fact that SARC has not gone anywhere. But right now, India, of course, is in different other parts and different international organizations which are obviously moving in a far positive trajectory, and I think that's where India really needs to niche in trying to get those act together. Directly linked to how the neighboring states are actually looking at you and constantly judging you from your own largish space, is that there is obviously an attempt, and especially this is again relevant to Bangladesh to a certain extent, Sri Lanka, that the government machinery is often used to actually get this hegemon and these negative images out there in the public domain. While I also argue that if you look, and I'm sure that if you look up the Foreign Ministry External Affairs Ministry website, you'll see that India seems to be very gung-ho about its relation with Bangladesh, extremely gung-ho about its relation with Sri Lanka, but that is not necessarily the ground reality. There is again, I argue that while the status positions may be on a certain level, the public opinion in most of these countries are very different from what the status positions are. And that's again another problem that we have with our neighbors. We are constantly saying that Sri Lanka is our best friend, and we've for many years constantly talking about the FTA, the free trade agreement that we have with Sri Lanka, which is extremely positive, has worked in both our mutual win-win. But it's not necessarily the reflection of the ground always. We've seen over the years, the neighbors have constantly used certain, these negative images, example of Sikkim annexation in 1975, the IPKF, 1987 to 1987 to 90, the Nepal blockade, trade blockade. These are the ones which are constantly flagged by our neighbors in every single particular, whenever they want to constantly, and again, as I said, government machinery is always being used to flag these and create that image of hegemon, which again is not necessarily what is it on the ground really. So there are two contrasting, trajectory that's taken place in India's neighborhood policies. Apart from the perceptions of the domestic unfolding, what is now increasingly gaining importance and relevance is your own domestic factor. Today we've seen both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh in their own particular state has played a certain role, not necessarily positive, and in this case. And we've also seen how center-state relation in India is constantly being a problem of how the foreign policy trajectory. Earlier days we've seen that, and it's true, foreign policy really is a central subject and they are able to, but given the interactive space that states have developed with our neighbors, there is also how they circumscribe by that particular role, and when the center and state, given our federal system, given the coalition that we work in today, that has come in the way of our own positive trajectory. Here's the example, of course, there was a reference by the chair just now about the Tamil issue and how regional political parties in Tamil Nadu has affected that in a great way. Let's look at Bangladesh and Sri Lanka briefly. Let me go back. We've seen from 1972 liberation of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh and our political party obviously has a historical lineage of working very closely with the Congress National Party. That of course changed with the assassination of Mujibur Rahman. We've seen how Bangladesh, under the rule of military leaders, there was a completely different trajectory of foreign policy that they took. They really marginalized India's role. And but subsequently to 1991, when Bangladesh emerged again as a parliamentary democracy, things improved. Coming to 2010, 2008 December, the 7th Jatiya Sanshad election took place in Bangladesh, and Awami League coalition came with a thumping victory, a 2/3 majority that they had never seen before. Everybody talked about it being a game changer for India. 2010, Sheikh Hasina came to Delhi. The first thing that we did was really roll out the carpet for her, and we've never done this before. $1 billion was offered to her in different grants in different space, and of course with a completely very, very low level of interest. Why did we do that in 2010, and why hadn't we done that earlier? Because we've seen Awami League also in the earlier phase when we were That was simply because Bangladesh, and I think that's been critical again with Sri Lanka too, that once Bangladesh really took concerns, took cognizance of our security concerns, India was ready to go down the red carpet. We've seen for long again, a reference was made this morning about the insurgents in the northeast and how Bangladesh for long had a role to play in fueling that. Sheikh Hasina coming for her on her second term, 2009, really changed that. She dramatically, there was an overall change in the way Bangladesh perceived these concerns, because they also were then, for many years now, also were being hit by this double policy that many of the Bangladesh political parties had undertaken. Bangladesh, as you know, is a very deeply polarized society. There is Awami League, middle of the Green Party, where we have another extreme, we have another coalition, which is the BNP, which is led by Khalida Zia, and the coalition with Jamaat Islami, a very right-wing party. And we have Jatiya Party. So basically, these four political parties which have I was just talking about the four main political parties that actually have dominance in Bangladesh. Awami and Awami Coalition, which of course, as I mentioned, historically has had a very positive role in India. The other is, of course, another extreme, which has been in the opposition for the last several years now, is the BNP coalition. Again, the Jamaat Islami, a right-wing party, has been a coalition partner. And the other is the Jatiya Party, which is led again by a erstwhile military dictator, Ershad. 2010, when we signed the document, again, this is one of the largest documents that India and Bangladesh has ever signed before, flagged about some 35 odd issues. And there was, again, a huge amount of expectations on both sides. But when we stand today just now, the only tangible thing that's happened out of the agreement that we signed in 2010 is the bilateral energy trade that has been initiated from Tripura. We, of course, doing 250 megawatts, and we promised that to 400 megawatts very soon. For the first time again, India was able to break the mold and get into infrastructure projects with Bangladesh, which for very long Bangladesh had resisted. This was the same time again that Sheikh Hasina really agreed to doing a lot of things that Bangladesh, but India had been wanting to do it. Bangladesh was unable to. So not only was India supporting Bangladesh in several infrastructure projects, and Bangladesh, as you know, is in dire need of those projects, but India on its own was also doing a lot of things on the borders to actually complement those projects, to ensure that we again get back to the connectivity that we're discussing. Bangladesh has been very hesitant to discuss a lot of connectivity issues at a bilateral level. India understood that. India took those issues on the multilateral level and have been able to overcome some of the difficulties involved. But at the same time, while we were constantly seeking all this, we also wanted Bangladesh to agree to transit for us. I mean, very simply, and some of you are aware of it, that given the geographical position, our northeast is cut off with Bangladesh. So we've often had to use a very circuitous road, which is known as the Chitni border, from Siliguri up to bring the mainland trade into northeast and vice versa. So we had argued for obvious natural reasons if Bangladesh should provide us with transit. In principle, it seemed that Bangladesh was okay with that. There was lots of bilateral dialogues taking place at that time. But of course, and that was something that Sheikh Hasina was constantly telling India, that I really need a big ticket to be able to do that. And what is the big ticket? What was the most high-strung emotional thing vis-a-vis the bilateral issue that Bangladesh has with India? That's water. While for India, the priority issue was security, and Bangladesh was obviously taking care of our security concerns, so that India was ready to roll out the red carpet. But here, Bangladesh was constantly asking that what has India done for us? You've done this for India. So obviously the next step was that we talk about water, and in this specific case, Tisa was the river which is being flagged. India and Bangladesh have 54 common rivers. The one equivalent that we have, which is now sustained also from 1996, is the Ganges Water Treaty. Tisa was on the cards.
we've seen how Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was doing visit Dhaka. He had got he accompanied with several northeastern chief ministers again for the first time. They were actually northeasters was getting. For very long, we've actually tried to ignore this, that Bangladesh and Northeast had also a direct link with each other, and we were constantly in denial about that. But this time it was a clear acknowledgement of the fact that Bangladesh also was in a situation, and certainly a positive way, looking at how investments and other things will go about. By then, we'd also agreed to PIPA, which was where allowed Bangladeshi investments to come in. But as on today, 2015 January, there hasn't been a single investment from Bangladesh into Indian soil. Why? Because they say our infrastructure issues are still not in place, our banking systems are not in place, many things. India, on the other hand, will constantly argue that they will give us great offers, and what they have is really much. It was all about food processing that wasn't going to give us much dividends, so on and so forth. But the matter of the ground is that nothing's really happened except for the fact that we agreed to in principle. On this particular visit, the Sheikh, our Prime Minister was going to Bangladesh. We've seen how the last moment, Chief Minister of West Bengal, she refused to be part of the delegation. And there was, of course, one must say this, that the kind of data that Dhaka and New Delhi specifically were discussing about Teesta were really old data. They want comparatively relevant data. In fact, the water flows hadn't been, really seen in great details, and there is a fact that there has been certain deterioration in the quality of water that flows down Teesta, and obviously Chief Minister of West Bengal wasn't very happy about the numbers that they were being discussed, and she of course wasn't, as she's gone in public to say, that she wasn't ever taken in the discussion when Delhi and Dhaka were actually discussing Teesta. So in her typical fashion, she in the last minute decided to stay out of it, and till date we're still struggling with that particular water. As I said, so far as there are many things that is as positively as unraveled in the last 5 years. But for Bangladesh, water has always been the most emotional quotient. And it doesn't matter who you speak to in Bangladesh. It could be somebody you're buying your sari from, it could be somebody from the foreign ministry, it could be a professor in university. The first thing that they're going to say is, why are you cutting our waters? So I'm just saying that for India, we need to understand that. For us, we were constantly arguing that we really roll the red carpet for you. Look at the kind of investments we're trying to do in Bangladesh. A lot of their infrastructure development, as I said, has been undertaken. But we were not able to take care of their emotional quotient. And that's something, another thing about India vis-a-vis its neighbors, that we often do what we think is good for them. We never stop to ask them that, what do you want? What do you think is good for you? We always told them. And I'll give you a very typical example. Bangladesh, for long, obviously, given its landlocked position, has to trade through Nepal and Bhutan only through India. And India used to give them that passage, but that was very limited passage for a couple of hours in a day. And they for long always has been asking us that why can't you give us 24 hours open access? And we argued that you just sell ginger, you just buy orange, and why do you need 24 hours access? What is it that you want to do? Not understanding that for them this was a huge issue, that you're limiting just because you have a position here, you're limiting our role there. Why is it that you're not able to? It was only after 2010 that Bangladesh and India agreed to 24 hours access. But the point is that you've lost your brownie point here. Bangladesh for long constantly talked about bringing down we've got fantastic trade with Bangladesh for many years. Officially the trade is 4+ billion, but if you take the unofficial trade into account, it goes up to 10 billion. Again, that's something that we've never factored in that. And we've constantly told, they constantly have asked us, why didn't you get your negative list? We did. We finally got the negative list down to 2012. But then again, you lost your brownie point. Had you done that, and for many years, I've been part of several of these bilateral dialogues, we've seen that many on the Indian table had argued that go ahead and dilute these numbers that they're asking for, the tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers. We can just get it to the minimum and see, as long as your national interest is not being, hindered, why are you not being able to do that? But of course, Foreign Ministry had his own reason and didn't do that, but they finally did it. And I honestly do not know what is it that was different in 2008 and what is it that made it possible in 2012. Except for the governments in place, yes. My argument vis-a-vis Bangladesh is that yes, it's a fact that we ideologically are on the same place with our community. That is fair enough, and I think every country has that particular right to go with the particular. Because we've seen how extreme positions the other opposition is, and I think, and I certainly don't want to be quoted, but the opposition leader Khalida Zia often is, really pathologically anti-India, I've seen, because there are many issues that they've actually scuttled when which are important. I'm talking about the gas pipeline issue. Again, having sat on several of those bilateral dialogues that we were discussing, this is a different factor that with Myanmar we lost out because we were not able to push files as clearly and quickly as they wanted us. So finally the whole deal got lost. But at the same time, we are constantly telling Bangladesh that you're sitting on huge reserves of natural gas. The numbers differ. US says there's about 10 TCF, Bangladesh themselves says about 6 TCF. What are the cases that they have a certain amount of natural gas reserve, which obviously Bangladesh is not in a position in terms of technological, in terms of financial implications, able to tap. So they would have to do that with India, which is the safest best partner because it's contiguous. But obviously they were very, and despite two committees that were set up by Khalida Zia, it was really clear that nothing was going to happen. And finally the committee did give a very negative saying that why should we, first, we don't know what the reserves are. Obviously we'll have to also invest in that to understand what your reserves are. And secondly, this being our only natural reserve, are we going to sell it to our enemy nation? So this was actually how they were viewing India at that point of time. This is 2007, 2008 that we were discussing. When this happened, we have had a NDA coalition in Delhi. They went over the top. They talked about, till then they were all quiet. Suddenly Al-Qaeda was discovered everywhere in Bangladesh. Till then there was, till the gas deal was on, there was no mention of Al-Qaeda. So the timing was also, extremely critical at this point of time. Similarly, we've seen that post-2010, as I said, several of these other issues fell in place. One is the security concerns, but I think the one particular issue which was never mentioned on the table was of illegal migration, or many of us economists prefer to call it undocumented migrants. Now, whose problem is that? I clearly feel it's India's problem, that you've allowed that migration to happen on your borders. We've heard it ad nauseum that the borders are difficult to man, they come through the rivers. So we know it all, but even then we've not been addressed. So do we actually believe that Bangladesh is going to address this problem for us? I do not think so. I don't think that if, Bangladesh is in a position to address it. Yes, there are economic migrants, and they are obviously, there is, if you look at the basic statistics in terms of the number of people on 1 square kilometers, Bangladesh obviously is the most densest population ever in the world. There's nothing that they have there to eat. Given the climate change issues, given the vagaries of nature that they face every year, there is obviously very limited opportunity for these Bangladeshis there. So there is a natural way of them moving in for looking for jobs. And as I think was mentioned by Professor our chair, that we've got Bangladeshi migrants all over, from Pondicherry to Chandigarh, everywhere, doing service that other local Indians wouldn't do. For very long, we've seen how northeast farmlands were cleared to buy any non-northeasterns. There were Bihari laborers, there were Nepali laborers, there were Bangladeshi laborers. Today, Bangladeshi laborers are also tilling the land in Punjab. Because your own farmers have now, acquired education, they've moved on to run other things. All that is fine. So obviously there was a need for those people here. But in terms of letting them come in, the onus is obviously on our borders. And I'm sorry, I don't think there's any argument the borders, and I know there are announced that there are no border security force officials here, but again, as I said, for very long, we've very closely working with them. And I do not see how that was, again, as I said in the last, in the UPA coalition, this was one particular aspect which is never mentioned. We never flagged it in the official because everything was going so come that we didn't want to discuss this matter because we realized this is beyond Sheikh Hasina really to address the problem. We've seen how when this particular party during the election campaign of BJP's, we've seen how this was flagged. Again, this often creates that particular feeling, and I've seen that in Dhaka when the election campaign was on here, how they were really, really closely watching what India was doing on this. I was in Dhaka in the post Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj's visit to Dhaka. And it was amazing, the reaction. We all of us sitting in India thought that was, she was really walking the talk, and this was Modi's absolutely kudos to him for having done these kind of things quickly, as soon as he's taken over. But you know what they said? That in that particular address to the nation, Sushma Swaraj, which was a 3,700 word document, there was not a single mention of Sheikh Hasina. That clearly, according to them, was meaning that this particular government in Delhi was moving away from the Awami League. And I was asked, this was a very close biography they were doing, and I said, the protocol issue that a foreign minister doesn't mention the prime minister, the prime minister will mention the prime minister. They said, no, you're reading it all wrong, we realized you got the signals, haven't you read the election, haven't you seen the election campaign? That clearly tells us that they are looking at Bangladesh not as a trade partner anymore. So they were obviously very negative signals that were being reading on complete, as I'm saying again, that reading is so different from each other. While we thought that here we were, we were best friends with Bangladesh, but that really wasn't the case. Let me come back to Sri Lanka for a while before we come back and close in my, I don't know how many more minutes I have, but we just close in. With Sri Lanka, we've seen, very briefly again, we've obviously had and in the neighborhood, one particular country that we've been very close to, apart from Bhutan, has been Sri Lanka. As I did mention, the FTA always got very well. We've had certain political differences here and there, but overall, the large picture has been very positive as compared to any other neighborhoods that we've had with. Post the annihilation of the Tamil militants, we've seen how the disappointment started unraveling, and there were many occasions, we had occasions to meet with their ministers, their foreign officials, and we've seen that how India was constantly talking about how the devolution package, was not being addressed to the way it should have been. There are several issues domestically that we were unhappy with, but Sri Lanka was obviously, in a constantly upbeat mood. And the Sinhala government was not in a mood really to look into these issues that the minority Tamils had at that point of time. That was, of course, there with us. We had that, but we overall thought that everything is in place and we'll be able to work out. We were building the railway lines with Jaffna at that point of time. We were also, there was a huge project of house development that was taking place. Again, we decided that we're not going to hold that back. So I think. Well, last year we've done some 27,000 of that, and I think only now few thousand are left of that entire promise that we've done. So for us, that was, that we're not going to get into that in a very formal way, but there were many occasions we were actually telling them that please, I think we really need to, look at that devolution package that we promised a lot more closely than you're doing just now. It was in March, I think, 2012 that Washington flagged this particular, human rights issue about this during the conflict, the last 100 days of conflict. India initially kept quiet. It was flagged once again, end of the year, and I think that's when India also said that I think you really need to look at this. There was a commission that was put in place, and the report obviously was not something which was very positive. And that's when, India was also taking a stand vis-a-vis what had happened in Sri Lanka. For very long, we've seen, because of our own domestic issues, India has been extremely hesitant to talk about human rights issues because we constantly felt that there's going to be coming on a back way soon. But that apart, the state politics, as I said, was unraveling in India too. We've seen how during the conflict zone, there was the fishermen issue was obviously at the Gulf. Once that happened, again there was this problem of Tamil fishermen and Indian fishermen overlapping each other's. There is a point problem that, frequent problem that Tamil fishermen are facing in Sri Lanka, that while they were not in a position to take an outright anti-stance towards Indian fishermen, because that would give a leverage to the Sinhala government. At the same time, they obviously, it was their livelihood which was at stake. We've seen how AIDMK, third largest party there, was obviously taking a stance which has been completely. We've seen how even during the swearing in Senegale, these political parties have been very against Sri Lanka's presence there, but of course that was not taken into account. As of now, I think there's a lot of dialogues underway right now, but we've seen how state is constantly, and I think that's another situation that India is developing, that what is the extent of the role that you are going to allow your state in influencing your bilateral foreign policy. I think that also, because in certain matters you really have to take them into consideration, because without them there is very little that you can actually undertake. But on the other hand, if there are certain central policies which are decided about the neighborhood, you certainly don't want a state government to come and put a poke in that. And that's exactly what's happening in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And I'll close it with the last section, which is the main issue which is now affecting the neighborhood. I think Professor Soren Singh dwelled on that a great deal, so I'll just discuss that. Which is this big elephant, or this huge elephant, or this huge dragon which is sitting in the neighborhood, and that's China. For many years, we've seen that how China has very quietly and swiftly made inroads in the neighborhood. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal are, of course, very specific cases where they've constantly worked against India's interests. On the other hand, we've seen, again, that's been a transition in the last 5 or 6 years, that India and US is working closely in the neighborhood, which wasn't the case really. The first time in 2010, when all this positive volume was happening, India and Bangladesh used to have military exercises way back in the early years, had stopped completely in the last 2 decades. US initiated that. Let's again, have a tripartite. Unfortunately, because of certain other domestic issues in Bangladesh, we were not able to undertake those military exercises. But India was comfortable enough now with the US being on board on Bangladesh. And we've seen that in the past, when both Sheikh Hasina and Khaleeda Zia has been extremely welcoming to China, that India had nothing but to quietly accept the position. But on US, Sheikh Hasina or the Awami League Party was always on the same page with India so far as their inroads into Bangladesh was, and I think India was very comfortable with that. And similarly for Sri Lanka now, we've seen, there's often, yesterday there was a reference to Hambantota, which may not be factually correct, but the kind of inroads that China has done in infrastructure and other things, there's no way that India can match that. So there is obviously huge challenges there, and I'm going to close it with one particular thing here about both Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is that while we are dealing with Awami League now and things are actually positive, I didn't make a reference to the debacle of 2014 elections. I'm not sure if any of you watched that, where Bangladesh Awami League went to elections without any of its opposition fighting the elections. And India full-heartedly supported that, citing every constitutional book that they can. And of course, the coup was that they were able to get China to support it too. That was again a backdoor diplomacy that I think India very effectively did with China. So when China and India were supporting it, Awami League had a complete go-ahead. My question is that if any other political party had done that in Bangladesh, would you have taken the same stance? You would in fact have cited exactly the same constitutional book to say how wrongful this election was. All I'm saying is that Bangladesh people have long memories. They are not going to forget, because this is one particular election where the public opinion was completely against the election being held. There is absolutely no choice in Bangladesh just now, because there is no opposition leader over this game. Sheikh Hasina is obviously, riding high at this point of time. But we must remember that Awami League without Sheikh Hasina as a leader is a different monster that we've never dealt with. On the other hand, I also argue that BNP minus Khaleeda Zia is again a completely different entity that we have very little knowledge of. And while I know, as I said, and I do understand, I do argue also that there has to be status positions about being a political party on the ideological front. On the other hand, there has to be other efforts and other endeavors with opposition party, which unfortunately we haven't done in Bangladesh. And we've completely forgotten that there are other political parties there. Fine, they're very diluted then. But 10 years from now, it's going to be a different scenario. And they are going to cite this very example that we've done in 2014 to tell you how you're not a friendly nation. I close it with that. Thank you very much.